Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. There are echoes in the ice that never fade. Tonight, we unseal a file that officially does not exist. Case File 731K, the suppressed record of the Kakorum Anomaly, and the discovery so profound it was erased from history. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some truths are not buried, they are frozen. Our story begins not in the star-dusted expanse of the cosmos, but in the sterile, humming quiet of a deep space listening post. The year is 1982. Amidst the crackle of cosmic background radiation and the distant whispers of dying stars, a new sound emerged. It was quiet, persistent, and mathematically perfect. At first, the analysts at the Arecibo Observatory dismissed it as interference, perhaps a Soviet satellite playing games in the escalating chill of the Cold War. But the signal was different. It wasn't a simple pulse or a wave. It was a complex, layered transmission, a cascade of structured data that seemed to repeat on a long, deliberate cycle. More unnervingly, triangulation efforts yielded an impossible result. The signal wasn't coming from the heavens. It was coming from Earth, specifically from the geographic South Pole, a place of profound silence and isolation, a place where nothing should be transmitting a signal this complex. The initial report, filed under reference code ASP77B, described the signal's characteristics with a growing sense of disbelief. It operated on a frequency thought to be absorbed by ice and rock, yet it punched through the Antarctic ice sheet with impossible clarity. It contained prime numbers, algorithmic patterns, and what one cryptographer tentatively labeled a syntax without a language. It was intelligent, it was deliberate, and it was old. Spectral analysis suggested the source had been broadcasting, uninterrupted, for millennia. This finding sent a shock wave through the handful of cleared individuals who saw the report. The implications were staggering. An unknown intelligence wasn't visiting from the stars. It had been here all along, buried beneath 2 miles of solid ice. Within 72 hours of its confirmation, a directive came down from a level of government that doesn't officially exist. Project ASP77B was terminated. All data was seized. The team was disbanded, its members reassigned to mundane projects, and bound by national security oaths so severe they effectively erased their involvement. The official explanation was instrument malfunction and persistent geophysical anomalies. But for those who heard it, the signal was no anomaly. It was a voice, a patient, ancient voice that had suddenly, for reasons unknown, decided to speak louder. The silent signal, as it was internally codenamed, became the first entry in a file that would grow to define the greatest secret in human history. The discovery that triggered a classification so absolute, it has held for over 40 years. To investigate the source of the silent signal, you cannot simply send a team. You must build a fortress of secrecy at the end of the world. Enter Outpost K14. To the public, it was announced in a dry press release as the Conan International Deep Ice Research Facility, a joint multinational effort to study climate history. Its budget was buried in esoteric subcommittees, its logistics handled by military airlift wings under the guise of polar resupply missions. But its true purpose was known to fewer than 20 individuals worldwide. Outpost K14 was built directly over the triangulated source of the signal. It was an architectural marvel of brutalist efficiency, designed to withstand 200-mile-per-hour winds and temperatures that could freeze exposed flesh in seconds. 3/4 of the facility was subterranean, drilled and melted into the ice itself, a metallic iceberg hidden within a natural one. Life at K14 was a study in controlled paranoia. The crew of 32, a mix of elite DARPA engineers, geophysicists, cryptographers, and a heavily armed special operations detail, masquerading as security contractors, were chosen not just for their expertise, but for their psychological resilience, and most importantly, their lack of close family ties. They were ghosts before they even set foot on the ice. Communication with the outside world was routed through a secure, encrypted channel with a 48-hour delay, monitored by intelligence agencies. Every hallway was under video and audio surveillance. Every digital correspondence was logged. The isolation was a weapon in itself. The 6-month-long polar night plunged the station into perpetual darkness, a disorienting reality broken only by the sterile 24-hour fluorescent hum of the labs. Leaked psychiatric evaluation logs from the station's doctor, a doctor, Aerys Thorne, speak of a pervasive auditory phenomenon. Crew members reported hearing faint, melodic sounds in the deep ice, sounds that matched the harmonic frequencies of the silent signal, even when all listening equipment was powered down. They complained of shared, specific dreams, of vast, dark structures moving beneath them. Thorne initially diagnosed it as a form of mass psychological suggestion, a winter over syndrome amplified by the classified nature of their mission. But in his final heavily redacted report, he conceded that the phenomenon seemed to have an external objective source. Outpost K14 wasn't just a listening post. It had become a tuning fork, and the minds of its inhabitants were beginning to resonate with the ancient, silent music buried in the ice below. For 2 years, the primary mission of Outpost K14 was singular: drill. Using a custom-designed thermal drill rig capable of reaching unprecedented depths, they bored into the Antarctic plateau. The ice cores they extracted were a frozen library of Earth's history, each layer a page telling of ancient atmospheres, volcanic eruptions, and long-extinct life. The team pushed past the known limits, drilling deeper into pre-quaternary ice that was over 2.7 million years old. The signal was their guide, growing stronger, clearer, and more complex with every meter they descended. Then, at 3,488 meters, it happened. The drill, which had been cutting smoothly through homogeneous ice, registered a catastrophic material density shift. The sensors screamed. It wasn't rock. The ground-penetrating radar had confirmed they were hundreds of meters above the bedrock. The drill had hit something impossibly hard, something that wasn't supposed to be there. The team initiated an emergency core extraction. The tension in the drill bay was absolute. For 12 agonizing hours, the winch brought the long, fragile column of ice to the surface. As the final section was laid in the sterile analysis trench, they saw it. Encased in ice, dated to the Pliocene epoch, an era before modern humans walked the Earth, was an object. It was a perfect, razor-edged shard of a dark, obsidian-like material. It was roughly a meter long, tapering to a point, and its surface was not smooth. It was covered in microscopic geometric patterns that seemed to shift and reconfigure under the light. It absorbed all light, reflecting nothing. It was colder than the surrounding ice, a point of absolute zero in the heart of the core. When a technician, against protocol, reached out with a gloved hand, the object emitted a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the deck plates. The signal they had been tracking from the surface? It wasn't a broadcast. It was the object's passive energy signature. This was not a tool or a weapon. The patterns on its surface were too complex, too intricate. One scientist, in a hushed whisper, called it a frozen library card. It was a fragment of something much, much larger, a piece of technology so advanced it was indistinguishable from physics itself. This was first contact, not with a ship descending from the sky, but with a message in a bottle, sent from a civilization that existed on Earth millions of years before our own. The awe of this discovery was immediately eclipsed by a profound, paralyzing fear. The lead geophysicist, Dr. Ilara Vance, keyed a single, prearranged code word into the secure comms terminal. Eurydice. The message was sent, and the world for the scientists of K14 was about to end. The Eurydice signal was a tripwire. It didn't just alert a command center. It initiated a global pre-planned response known as the Blackout Protocol. This wasn't a military plan. It was a species-level contingency, drafted by a shadow consortium of powers who had long theorized about a context-level threat, a discovery so profound it would shatter human society, religion, and power structures. Within minutes of the signal's receipt, Outpost K14 went dark. All external communication links were severed. The station's own satellite uplink was remotely deactivated. To the outside world, the Conan Research Facility had simply ceased to exist. Less than 18 hours later, a flight of unmarked Black C-17s, capable of landing on unprepared ice runways, descended from the perpetually gray Antarctic sky. They were not from any single nation's air force. They bore the insignia of the Antarctic Treaty Organization's Special Projects Division, a front for a multinational, clandestine force. The men who disembarked were not soldiers in a conventional sense. They were retrieval specialists, clad in sterile, pressurized environment suits, their faces hidden behind polarized visors. They moved with terrifying efficiency. The 32 members of the K14 science and support staff were rounded up, sedated, and flown out. They were taken to separate, undisclosed debriefing facilities around the globe. They were never to see each other again. Their lives were systematically dismantled, public records altered, employment histories rewritten, digital footprints erased. They were given new identities, generous pensions, and a single non-negotiable warning. To speak of what they found would be considered an act of treason against the whole of humanity. The artifact and every gram of data from the outpost were secured. The ice core Anomaly was placed in a cryo-containment unit and flown to a deep underground facility, rumored to be beneath the Utah desert or the Siberian permafrost. Then, the cleanup began. Outpost K14 was stripped of all advanced technology. After the retrieval team left, a remote demolition charge, built into the station's foundation, was detonated. The official story, released 6 months later, was that a sudden shift in the ice sheet had caused a catastrophic structural collapse, tragically claiming the lives of all personnel. A memorial was erected in Christchurch, New Zealand, their names etched in stone, names that belonged to no one. The Blackout Protocol was a horrifying success. A truth that would have redefined our species was captured, contained, and buried once more, this time under a mountain of lies. The silence from Antarctica resumed, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was an enforced, guarded quiet, The question that remains, echoing in the classified archives of the Obsidian Archive, is not just what they found, but why the secret is worth more than the truth. By late 1961, the Anomaly designated Codex was no longer a silent monolith. The initial seismic and radiological readings that first drew clandestine attention had been superseded by a phenomenon far more unsettling: patterned electromagnetic emissions. At Listening Post Echo 7, a subterranean facility hastily constructed beneath the guise of a geological survey station, a team of hand-picked radio astronomers and cryptographers worked in shifts, their faces perpetually bathed in the green glow of oscilloscopes. They were tasked with the impossible, deciphering a signal that defied every known principle of communication. It wasn't radio, it wasn't microwave, it was something else, a complex waveform that seemed to ride on the very fabric of background radiation. The initial recordings were dismissed as equipment malfunction or cosmic noise, but the patterns were too persistent, too structured. Dr. Aerys Thorne, a brilliant but disgraced linguist brought in for his work on dead languages, was the first to suggest it wasn't noise at all. He called it structured static. In his declassified, though heavily redacted logs, he wrote, "The signal has a syntax, a terrifying alien syntax. It does not communicate in linear fashion, but in overlapping recursive layers. It is less a language and more a living equation being solved in real time." The team grew increasingly isolated, not just from the outside world, but from each other. Sleep deprivation and paranoia became rampant. They heard whispers in the static, phantom voices that seemed to call their names. Official reports list 3 cases of acute psychological breakdown within the first 6 months. The true number is believed to be higher. The breakthrough, or what they perceived as one, came on October 4th. For 17 minutes, the signal stabilized into a clear, repeating sequence. It was a complex string of prime numbers, but it was also something more. Embedded within the mathematical sequence was a biological marker, a representation of a DNA helix, but one with a fundamentally different base structure. It was a message and a warning. It wasn't from the stars, but from something terrestrial, something ancient that had just woken up. This was the moment the project shifted from scientific curiosity to a matter of national security. The files were stamped with a new, higher classification: eyes only. The discovery was no longer just an anomaly. It was a potential interlocutor, and its first words were a map of a biology that should not exist. The voices from the static weren't just a signal to be decoded. They were a claim of ownership for a world we thought was ours. The DNA revelation from Listening Post Echo 7 sent shockwaves through the highest echelons of power. The discovery could no longer be contained within a subterranean lab. It had a physical epicenter, a point of origin that had to be isolated at all costs. Within 72 hours, Executive Order was signed, authorizing the military to establish an immediate and permanent exclusion zone. Publicly, it was announced as a new weapons testing range, a convenient fiction that explained the sudden influx of military hardware and the expropriation of over 500 square miles of remote, arid territory. Families who had lived on that land for generations were given less than a day to evacuate, offered paltry compensation, and forced to sign non-disclosure agreements they couldn't possibly understand. They became the first civilian casualties of a secret war. The area was officially designated Provisional Containment Area 01, but the men who patrolled its perimeter had a simpler, more fitting name for it: the Quarantine Zone. or the Q-zone. A triple-layered fence went up, strung with concertina wire and sensors that could detect a rabbit's weight. Watchtowers, stark and brutalist, were erected every 500 meters. The airspace above was restricted, and satellite trajectories were rerouted to create a blind spot in the sky. Inside this cage, a new ecosystem of fear began to thrive. Strange lights were reported by patrols, hovering silently over the central valley where the codex was located. Geiger counters would inexplicably scream into the red, only to fall silent moments later. Wildlife exhibited bizarre mutations and aggressive behavior. A declassified incident report mentions a patrol finding a pack of coyotes, their fur sloughed off and their eyes glowing with a faint blue luminescence. They did not run. They watched. The psychological toll on the soldiers was immense. They weren't just guarding a piece of land. They were standing watch on the edge of a reality that was actively hostile to their own. They were told they were protecting the nation from a new Soviet threat. But the hushed conversations in the barracks spoke of something else. They spoke of the ground humming, of whispers carried on the wind, and of the unsettling feeling of being constantly watched by something that wasn't there. The quarantine zone wasn't just a fence, it was a lid, pressed down hard on a box that was beginning to shake. Containment was an illusion. The architects of the Q-zone believed they had sealed the anomaly off from the world, but they failed to consider that the world might not be the only thing trying to get in, or that something else was already inside with it. The first unscheduled visitor was logged on a moonless night in March 1962. A perimeter sensor on the northern fence registered a breach, but the patrol found no tracks, no cut wire, nothing. The only evidence was a single perfect frame from a security camera. The image is still classified, but a leak from a former archivist describes it as a tall, impossibly thin silhouette, distorted as if by heat haze, standing just beyond the fence line. The figure was gone in the next frame. The incident was officially logged as sensor ghosting caused by atmospheric interference. But the interference was just beginning. Over the next year, reports of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, spiked within and around the zone's restricted airspace. These were not the silver discs of popular imagination. Witness statements from military pilots and radar operators, procured through Freedom of Information requests, described dark, non-reflective, boomerang-shaped craft that moved with impossible velocity and made no sound. They would appear directly over the zone's center, hover for minutes or hours, and then vanish. They never responded to hails. They never displayed hostile intent. They simply observed. Were they drawn by the Codex's transmissions? Or were they somehow connected to its origin? The paranoia within the Q-zone intensified. The Internal Security Directorate, a shadowy group known only as the Janitors, began to suspect a human element. Were Soviet spies trying to penetrate the perimeter? A series of brutal interrogations of personnel commenced, based on the flimsiest of suspicions. But the visitors weren't human. An after-action report from an event codenamed Tango Sierra details a terrifying encounter. A small fire team investigating anomalous energy readings came across 3 figures deep inside the zone. The report describes them as wearing form-fitting, iridescent suits that seemed to ripple and change color. When challenged, the figures did not respond verbally. Instead, the fire team's leader reported a sudden, overwhelming flood of abstract geometric concepts and feelings of profound dread in his mind. The team retreated in disarray, two of them requiring long-term psychiatric care. The unscheduled visitors were not trying to breach the quarantine. They were conducting their own study, utterly indifferent to the human fence built around the subject of their interest. The horrifying realization began to dawn. We weren't the zookeepers. We were just another exhibit in someone else's zoo. By the winter of 1963, the situation at Provisional Containment Area 01 was deemed untenable. The Codex's transmissions were growing stronger, the incursions by unknown entities more frequent, and the psychological stability of the on-site personnel was collapsing. The discovery was too active, too volatile to simply be studied or contained. A final desperate solution was proposed and approved at the highest level of government. It was codenamed Operation Winter Mantle. The name was chillingly appropriate. The objective was not to understand the anomaly, but to bury it, to cover it in a blanket of concrete, lead, and secrecy so thick that nothing could get out, and no one would ever stumble upon it again. It was an admission of absolute failure, a decision to hide our heads in the sand in the face of a terrifying, cosmic truth. The logistical scale of Winter Mantle was staggering. Under the public guise of constructing a deep Earth strategic communications relay, a multinational conglomerate, itself a front for the intelligence community, began the largest excavation project in history. Thousands of workers were brought in, all bound by security oaths that carried the penalty of treason. They worked under harsh, armed guard, with no knowledge of what they were truly building. They were entombing a god or a demon, and they thought they were laying telephone cables. Over 18 months, they excavated a cavern around the Codex, a chasm so vast it had its own weather systems. Then, they began to pour. A specialized mix of concrete, lead shot, and boron was pumped into the cavern, layer by agonizing layer. The original research team from Listening Post Echo 7, including Dr. Aerys Thorne, were kept on site, forced to monitor the Codex's dying transmissions. Thorne's last known entry, smuggled out by a sympathetic guard, is haunting. The signals are not weakening. They are changing. The structure is becoming pleading. It is showing us images, star charts. Dying suns, a journey. It is not a weapon. It is a refugee. And we are burying it alive. On the day the final pour was completed, a strange, localized seismic event was recorded, a tremor that originated directly from the now entombed Codex. And then, silence. The signals stopped. The UAPs stopped visiting. Operation Winter Mantle was declared a success. The site was decommissioned, the workers reassigned, and the records sealed for 150 years. A concrete lid had been placed over the great discovery. But a mantle of winter does not destroy what lies beneath it. It only preserves it. It waits for the thaw. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors once opened can never be closed again. They can only be hidden. Narrator. In the silent, dust-filled archives of forgotten projects, truth often resides, not in what is written, but in what has been deliberately removed. Our investigation now leads us to a series of artifacts that are both a map and a cage, the official logbooks from Project Chimera. These are not mere scientific journals. They are testaments to a discovery so profound, so paradigm-shifting, that an entire apparatus of state secrecy was mobilized not to study it, but to bury it. We gained access to digitized copies through a source we can only identify as Prometheus, a source who has taken an immeasurable risk. At first glance, they appear mundane, bound in standard issue navy blue canvas, their covers stamped with a simple alphanumeric code, XG704. The pages are filled with the neat, precise handwriting of geologists and physicists, detailing seismic readings, core sample analyses, and spectrographic data. The language is dry, academic, filled with the jargon of professionals doing their job. But then you see them, the black bars, thick, unforgiving blocks of ink that obliterate words, sentences, entire paragraphs. They are not haphazard marks of a censor's pen. They are methodical, uniform, and absolute. They are the digital equivalent of a surgical scar, excising a truth deemed malignant. What lies beneath that ink? Our team, using forensic light filtering algorithms, could only discern the faintest impressions left on the paper. We found indentations of words like impossible, non-Euclidean, and sentient resonance. These are not terms one finds in a standard geological survey. The redactions grow more frantic as the dates progress. Early entries from the project's inception have only a few blacked-out phrases. But as they neared the date of the event, the redactions become a suffocating plague. Whole pages are nothing but black ink, a void in the historical record. On page 142, a log entry by a Dr. Aerys Thorne notes, initial resonance frequency is stable. The word stable is underlined 3 times, a hint of disbelief. The very next entry is a full-page redaction. What did that resonance signify? What was it emanating from? The logbooks don't tell us. Instead, they scream at us with their silence. The official report, the one that was declassified in 1998, states that Project Chimera was a deep Earth drilling experiment that was terminated due to unexpected geological instability. It was a budget cut, a failed venture. But these logbooks tell a different story. They tell of a team that found something that listened back. The black ink isn't just hiding data, it's hiding fear. It is the sterile, bureaucratic signature of panic. These books are the first layer of the onion, the first locked door in a hallway of secrets, and they prove one thing beyond any doubt. The official story is a lie. Narrator: physical evidence can be redacted, documents can be burned. But memory is harder to erase. It can be silenced, but sometimes it finds a way to speak from beyond the grave. This is the story of Dr. Evelyn Reed, a senior geologist on Project Chimera. Officially, she took an early retirement due to health concerns just weeks after the project was shuttered. She lived a quiet life and passed away in 2004. But she left something behind. A series of microcassette tapes entrusted to her sister with instructions to release them if the silence ever becomes too loud. Her sister contacted our source, Prometheus, last year. What you are about to hear is the only known first-hand account of what happened deep within the Earth at Site XG774. It is Dr. Reed's final testimony. Reed: they told us it was a lie, a mass hallucination brought on by subterranean gases. That's the official story they rehearsed with us. They made us sign papers. So many papers. But I was there. I saw the readings. Geology has rules. Physics has laws. They are the bedrock of our reality. What we found, it didn't just break the rules, it laughed at them. We were drilling for core samples in a Precambrian craton, one of the oldest, most stable parts of the Earth's crust. It should have been geologically silent, boring even. But the drills hit something. Not rock, not a void. The drill bit. It stopped, but the sensors showed it wasn't broken. It was being held. The strain gauges were off the charts, but there was no friction, no heat. It was just held in place. Then came the resonance. It wasn't a sound, not through the air. It was a vibration that came up through the soles of our feet, through the concrete floor. It felt structured, like a language. Aerys, Dr. Thorne, he hooked it up to a signal analyzer. The patterns weren't random. They were complex, mathematical. They were responding to our drill. We were the ones making the noise, and it was telling us to be quiet. I remember looking at the spectrograph and the material we had brushed against. Its composition was impossible. It contained isotopes that shouldn't exist, bonded in a crystalline structure that defied crystallography. It was an artifact, an ancient, impossibly vast artifact, and we had just knocked on its door. That's when the men in black suits arrived. They weren't military. They were something else. Quiet, efficient. They took our notes, our data, our samples. They told us the project was over. They told us what we would say and what we would never say. They are still watching me. I know they are. This isn't a confession. This is a warning. You can't bury something that was never dead. Narrator. Dr. Evelyn Reed's testimony changes everything. It reframes the redacted logbooks from a bureaucratic cover-up to an active containment of an earth-shattering truth. The discovery wasn't just a geological anomaly, it was contact. Narrator. In the ecosystem of a state-sanctioned secret, there are two types of people: those who comply and those who become liabilities. Dr. Evelyn Reed complied, living out her days in quiet paranoia. Dr. Aerys Thorne, the brilliant physicist who first translated the sentient resonance, was a liability. He was the project lead, the one man who understood the full scope of their discovery. And 1 week after Project Chimera was officially terminated, Dr. Aerys Thorne vanished. The official record is insultingly simple. A single-page memo in his personnel file states he was transferred to an interdepartmental special projects group at an undisclosed location. No forwarding address, no further contact. His security clearance was elevated to a level so high, it effectively erased him. But when you erase a man like Thorne, you leave behind a silhouette, a void. We spoke to a former colleague of his, a junior technician on the project who asked to remain anonymous. He described Thorne in the final days as a ghost. He had stopped sleeping, fueled by coffee and a terrifying excitement. He was convinced the resonance was not just a signal, but a consciousness. He believed it was trapped or sleeping, and that they had been reckless. Our source told us Aerys wasn't scared of it. He was scared of us. He said humanity was like a child playing with a god's nervous system. The day he disappeared, his office was sterile. His personal effects were gone. His chalkboards, usually covered in complex equations, were wiped clean. But the janitor who cleaned his office that night told his son a strange story years later. He said there was a faint geometric pattern left in the chalk dust on the floor, almost invisible. A complex, repeating mandala that wasn't there that morning. Was it a final message? A diagram? Or a symbol of what he had found? Thorne's disappearance was the true beginning of the cover-up. It was the moment the protocol shifted from classification to sanitation. They didn't just take the data, they took the interpreter. They removed the one person who could rediscover the truth from memory alone. Was he eliminated? Or was he sequestered, forced to work on weaponizing or communicating with the anomaly in some deep underground bunker. The lack of a body is what's most chilling. It suggests he is still useful. A mind like his is a resource or a threat that cannot be left unattended. His family was told he died in a training accident. They received a generous pension and a folded flag. They were told not to ask questions. The disappearance of Dr. Aerys Thorne serves as the most potent warning in this entire affair. When you get too close to a classified truth, the system doesn't just redact your findings. It redacts you. Narrator. How do you hide a mountain? How do you undiscover a continent? The final act of this conspiracy was not just to classify the discovery, but to erase the very ground upon which it was made. Site XG774, the location of Project Chimera, no longer exists on any modern map. After the project was terminated and its key personnel were silenced or disappeared, a new operation began. It was codenamed Operation Salted Earth. Officially, it was a massive environmental cleanup initiative. A story was leaked to a few local newspapers about a significant underground aquifer contamination from experimental drilling chemicals. The area, a vast swathe of uninhabited federal land, was declared a permanent ecological exclusion zone. No entry, for any reason. But our source, Prometheus, provided satellite imagery from the time. They don't show a cleanup. They show an excavation, a massive effort, not to clean, but to bury. For months, convoys of unmarked trucks moved in and out of the site, pouring thousands of tons of a specialized concrete and lead aggregate into the primary drill shaft. They weren't just sealing a hole, they were entombing something, creating a sarcophagus deep within the Earth's crust. The final step was to scrub the academic and digital worlds. Research papers published by Thorne and Reed years prior, papers on deep Earth resonance and seismic wave theory that now seemed dangerously prescient, were subtly edited in online academic archives. Footnotes were removed, datasets were corrected for instrument error. It was a digital book, burning, silent, and insidious. Any junior scientists associated with the project found their careers stalling. Their grant proposals were denied, their promotions blocked. They were professionally isolated, left to drift into obscurity. The cover-up was a masterclass in modern secrecy. It used bureaucracy, disinformation, and technological control to create a perfect vacuum around a moment in history. They made the truth so difficult and dangerous to find that most people would simply give up. They salted the earth so that nothing new could ever grow. What we are left with is a ghost story, pieced together from redacted files, a dead woman's testimony, and the shadow of a vanished man. The discovery that triggered this monumental act of classification remains a mystery. Was it an alien artifact, a terrestrial intelligence, a geological feature that rewrites physics? We may never know. But the scale of the cover-up tells us one thing for certain. Whatever they found, they were terrified of it. And perhaps they were right to be. The real question is not what they buried, but whether it can be contained forever. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. Narrator. In the silent, frozen expanse of low Earth orbit, our eyes see everything, or so we are told. During the height of the Cold War, a web of surveillance satellites, a project codenamed Aperture, formed an unbroken chain of observation around the globe. Its purpose was simple: to ensure no missile silo could be built, no troop movement could go unnoticed. Aperture was the all-seeing eye, a testament to technological supremacy. But on October 7, 1983, for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, that eye went blind. Not a system-wide failure, not a solar flare, not a predictable pass over the poles. This was different. A localized, geographically fixed void over one of the most desolate and inaccessible regions on the planet, the Antarctic Plateau. A perfect circle of nothing. It wasn't just an absence of data, it was an active nullification of signal. The telemetry from satellite K14 didn't just stop. It returned a flat line, a perfect zero, a statistical impossibility. In the jargon of NORAD's Deep Space Tracking Division, it was a data sink. The information was going in, but it wasn't coming out. Technicians at Buckley Air Force Base initially logged it as an instrument malfunction. A high-energy particle strike, perhaps. They ran diagnostics, rebooted systems, and waited for the satellite's next pass. 96 minutes later, KH-11 sailed over the same coordinates. And again, for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the world beneath it vanished from their screens. Panic began to set in. This wasn't a glitch. A glitch is random. This was precise. It was predictable. It was a location. Other assets were tasked. Signals intelligence satellites, weather monitors, even a hastily rerouted French SPOT satellite. They all reported the same thing: a geographically stable circular zone of absolute electronic silence. It absorbed radar, scrambled radio waves, and swallowed infrared imaging. It was a blind spot on the planet. For decades, the official record stated that Project Aperture never experienced a single day of significant downtime. This is a lie. The logs from that October, which we acquired through a source deep within the National Reconnaissance Office, tell a different story. They show a frantic, escalating series of queries and commands directed at this one specific region. They speak of signal negation and unidentified energy dampening. What was down there on the ice, concealed beneath miles of frozen wasteland, that could punch a hole through the most sophisticated surveillance network ever created? This wasn't just a technical problem. It was an ontological one. It was a piece of the world that refused to be seen. And it was this refusal, this defiant emptiness, that served as the first clue. The initial thread in a tapestry of secrecy so profound, it would ultimately lead to the discovery that triggered classification. Narrator: in the ecosystem of bureaucracy, panic travels faster than light. The anomaly over the Antarctic Plateau, now internally designated the blind spot, or more ominously, the shadow, had existed for less than 72 hours before the response from Washington came. It was not a directive to investigate further. It was not a command to deploy more assets or to form a scientific task force. It was an order to stop looking. The document was titled Decommission Order 731. The number itself, 731, is a chilling echo of history's darkest chapters, a detail that was surely not lost on its authors. The order was transmitted via secure telex, bypassing the usual chain of command. It was addressed directly to the Project Aperture Director at the NRO and the station chief at Buckley. Its language was stark, absolute, and laced with unprecedented levels of legal threat. It ordered the immediate and permanent cessation of all targeted surveillance of the specified coordinates. All data collected over the previous 3 days related to the signal anomaly was to be isolated, encrypted with a unique, single-use key, and transferred to a non-networked physical medium. The original logs were to be wiped. The order went further. It enacted a program-wide gag order under the authority of the National Security Act of 1947, explicitly stating that any discussion of the anomaly, even within secure facilities, would be treated as an act of treason. Think about the implications. A multi-billion-dollar intelligence apparatus, the cornerstone of Western defense, was being deliberately blinded. An entire sector of the planet was being declared off-limits to our own eyes by our own government. Why? What could justify such a drastic self-inflicted wound to national security? The order was signed by a deputy director of an obscure intelligence subcommittee, a man whose name appears nowhere else in public records before or after this event. He was a ghost, a signature on a death warrant for curiosity. We spoke to a former Aperture technician who agreed to talk on the condition of absolute anonymity. He described the atmosphere on the day Order 731 came down. It was like a funeral, he said. We had found the most incredible thing we'd ever seen. A true unknown. A hole in the universe in our own backyard. We were buzzing with theories, an atmospheric phenomenon, a foreign technology, something else entirely. We were on the verge of a paradigm shift. Then the telex came in. Men in dark suits, who we'd never seen before, arrived within the hour. They didn't speak. They just watched as we complied. We were told the official reason was a cascade failure risk in the satellite's primary imaging sensor, and that the data was corrupted. We all knew that was a lie. Decommission Order 731 wasn't a technical directive. It was an act of containment. Not containment of a physical threat, but of an idea. It was the moment the search for answers ended and the construction of a wall of secrecy began. The discovery that triggered classification was now officially and violently hidden. Narrator. A vacuum of information, like any vacuum in nature, cannot exist for long. Something must rush in to fill it. With dozens of technicians and analysts now bound by a terrifying gag order, the architects of the cover-up needed a plausible narrative, a story to quarantine the truth. They needed an official explanation. It arrived 2 weeks later, not in a classified directive, but in a dry academic-sounding internal report distributed by the U.S. Geological Survey's Interagency Liaison Office. The report was titled Analysis of Anomalous Deep Earth Seismic Events and Associated Ionospheric Disturbance. It was a masterpiece of obfuscation. The document, running over 200 pages, argued that the satellite blind spot was not a blind spot at all. It was, the report claimed, a temporary and highly localized distortion of the magnetosphere. The cause? A unique seismic aberration deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. The theory was elegant in its complexity. A pocket of superpressurized liquid metallic hydrogen, a theoretical state of matter, had allegedly formed near the Earth's core and was migrating towards the crust. Its immense electromagnetic field, the report hypothesized, was interacting with the planet's own magnetic field, creating a temporary lens effect that warped and deflected satellite signals in a concentrated area. The report was filled with complex mathematical models, spectral analysis charts, and geological diagrams. It was designed to be impenetrable to all but a handful of specialists in the world. And any specialist who might question the data would find that the raw sensor readings were, conveniently, classified to a level beyond their access. It was the perfect scientific smokescreen. It explained everything, and it proved nothing. We submitted the declassified sections of this report to Dr. Aerys Thorne, a geophysicist at Caltech. His assessment was blunt. "This is science fiction," he told us via a video call. "The energy required to create an ionospheric disturbance of the magnitude described from a subterranean source is astronomical. It would be the equivalent of a continuous 9.5 earthquake localized to a few square miles. The thermal and seismic energy release would be detectable from the moon. The ice sheet would have flash melted into the ocean. This report isn't an explanation. It's a beautifully constructed piece of misdirection. It uses the language of science to create a myth. The myth served its purpose. The seismic aberration theory became the official, albeit classified, truth. It was a file to be closed, a box to be checked. It turned a terrifying unknown into a boring geological footnote. It allowed those in power to say, "We know what it is, it's under control, and it's not interesting." But behind this facade of scientific certainty, the true discovery, the discovery that triggered classification, was being buried under layers of manufactured data and bureaucratic lies, waiting for someone to notice the cracks in the foundation. Narrator: the perfect lie is a fragile thing. It requires constant maintenance, constant vigilance. And in a bureaucracy as vast as the United States government, secrets have a way of seeping through the cracks. 20 years after Decommission Order 731, a single page was scanned and uploaded to a fringe dark web forum from a terminal inside the Pentagon. It was a memorandum for record, dated 6 days after the initial discovery. It was almost entirely redacted. Thick black bars obscured the sender, the recipients, and nearly all of the subject line and body text. But the censors, in their haste or arrogance, missed a few words. And these words dismantle the entire official narrative of a seismic aberration. The subject line reads, Analysis of non-terrestrial signature. Non-terrestrial, not geological, not from the Earth. The memo continues, a ghost of a conversation trapped in ink. Paragraph 1, a single phrase survives. Unmistakable biological markers. Paragraph 2, recommend immediate implementation of protocol. And then, the most chilling fragment of all, near the bottom of the page, a handwritten annotation in the margin, next to a block of redacted text. The annotation reads, "It is not broadcasting, it is waiting." Let's dissect this. Non-terrestrial signature. This confirms that whatever was in the blind spot was not of this world. Unmistakable biological markers. This tells us it wasn't a piece of technology, a crashed probe, or a natural phenomenon. It was alive. Or it was composed of the building blocks of life. Protocol. In the lexicon of clandestine operations, protocols are pre-planned responses to specific, high-impact scenarios. The fact that a protocol already existed for this suggests that this contingency, however unbelievable, had been considered before. And that final terrifying annotation, it is not broadcasting, it is waiting. This reframes the entire event. The blind spot wasn't a passive phenomenon. The signal wasn't just being blocked. The entity, the discovery, was actively concealing itself. It was aware of the observation. The silence was a deliberate act. This memo is the Rosetta Stone of the entire conspiracy. It is the missing link between the initial anomaly and the frantic, top-level cover-up. The government didn't classify a geological event. They classified contact. Or more accurately, the detection of something that had been here all along, hidden beneath the ice, waiting. The seismic aberration story was a lie to hide a truth they felt humanity couldn't handle. The discovery that triggered classification wasn't a rock. It was a presence. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The journey of Object K14, the fragment, did not begin in the sterile clean rooms of the Atacama Desert Research Facility. But that is where its true nature began to unravel, and where the world unknowingly teetered on the brink of a new reality. Transported under a level of security usually reserved for nuclear warheads, the fist-sized, obsidian-like shard arrived in a cryostasis container, its temperature maintained at a precise negative 180 degrees Celsius. Initial reports from the Kakorum recovery team were heavily redacted, but the few unredacted lines spoke of non-terrestrial origin and anomalous energy signatures. This was enough to trigger the highest levels of classification before the first analysis even began. The team assigned was a ghost crew, experts pulled from disparate fields, their official records scrubbed, their families told they were on a deep ocean geological survey. They were, for all intents and purposes, ghosts working on a phantom project. Dr. Alara Vance, a leading material scientist, was the first to examine it outside the container. The visual data was baffling. The fragment's surface was impossibly smooth, absorbing nearly 100% of the light that hit it, giving it the appearance of a hole in reality. Under an electron microscope, there was no crystalline structure, no atomic lattice that adhered to any known physical laws. It was, as she noted in a now classified log, a perfectly ordered chaos. When they attempted to take a sample, the problems escalated. Diamond-tipped drills dulled and broke. High-powered lasers were absorbed without leaving a mark. The material was, by all metrics, indestructible. But that wasn't the most disturbing discovery. The fragment was not inert. It was emitting a low-frequency, patterned signal. It wasn't radiation. It was something else entirely. A complex wave of information that seemed to respond to its environment. When a quantum computer was brought online in the adjacent lab, the fragment's signal immediately changed, mimicking the quantum processor's resonant frequency and then complexifying it. It was learning. It was communicating in a language of pure mathematics that our most advanced systems could barely comprehend. The discovery that triggered the ultimate classification wasn't that we had found something alien. It was that it was actively analyzing us. A memo, stamped with a single stark red word, Damascus, was circulated. All external communication was cut. The facility went into complete lockdown. The scientists were no longer researchers. They were custodians of a secret that could shatter the foundations of human existence. In every system of absolute control, there is always a variable, human conscience. For the Damascus Project, that variable was Dr. Aerys Thorne, a theoretical physicist who saw not a threat, but a revelation. He believed the containment of Object K14 was not for humanity's protection, but for the preservation of power structures that would crumble in the face of such a paradigm-shifting truth. His dissent began subtly, in encrypted log entries that questioned the project's ethical framework. He argued that the fragment's signal was not hostile, but inquisitive, a cosmic handshake that we were refusing to accept out of fear. His concerns were dismissed by the project's military oversight as ontological contamination. Thorne knew then that the official channels were a dead end. His gambit would have to be one of immense personal risk. Over 3 months, he painstakingly siphoned fragments of data: spectrographic analysis, signal decryption attempts, psychological reports on the fragment's reactive intelligence. He used a method of steganography, hiding the data within the benign code of seismic sensor readings that were periodically transmitted from the facility. The data was a digital ghost, invisible to the facility's relentless internal surveillance. His contact was a seasoned investigative journalist, a man known only by the codename Cassandra. Their communication was a throwback to a bygone era of espionage. Encrypted messages were embedded in the metadata of seemingly innocuous photographs posted on public forums. Dead drops were arranged in the desolate landscapes surrounding the Atacama facility. Thorne would leave a micro SD card taped beneath a specific rock along a deserted service road. A day later, it would be gone. The tension was suffocating. Every footstep in the corridor, every unscheduled systems check, felt like the prelude to his discovery. The project's internal security, a faceless unit referred to only as the janitors, were known for their efficiency. They didn't just eliminate threats, they erased them from existence. Thorne's final data packet contained the most explosive information. The fragment was not just a piece of an object, but a node in a network. It was communicating with something else, something impossibly distant. But he had grown careless, or perhaps desperate. A subtle fluctuation in the seismic data packets, a deviation of 0.001%, was flagged by an AI monitoring the outgoing traffic. It was enough. Aerys Thorne never made it to his next dead drop. His access was revoked mid-experiment. Security footage showed 2 men in sterile black fatigues escorting him from the lab. He was never seen again. His personnel file was wiped, his apartment cleared out. It was as if he never existed. The discovery that triggered classification was now a secret that people would die to protect. Decades have passed since the recovery of Object K7 and the silent disappearance of Dr. Aerys Thorne. The Atacama facility has officially been decommissioned, listed as a defunct geological survey site. But the true heart of the mystery remains where it all began, deep within the ice-locked peaks of the Kakorum mountain range. The original crash site, now designated as Joint Task Force Exclusion Zone 734, is one of the most fortified and secretive locations on the planet. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it is a black site of unprecedented scale. Commercial flights are rerouted hundreds of miles around it. Satellite imagery available to the public is mysteriously corrupted or shows outdated pictures of empty snowfields. However, a dedicated community of open-source intelligence analysts, amateur satellite trackers, and former intelligence contractors have pieced together a chilling mosaic. Leaked thermal imaging from a rogue Russian satellite shows a massive, unexplained heat source beneath the ice, one that does not correspond to any known geothermal activity. The entire area pulses with a low-frequency electromagnetic field that disrupts electronics for miles. In the absence of facts, speculation has become a thriving ecosystem. The theories are as vast as they are terrifying. The most prevalent is the dormant sentinel theory, which posits the main body of the object is an extraterrestrial probe that has been buried for millennia. The fragment, K7, was a piece that broke off, and its awakening in the lab activated the parent craft. Another popular theory, favored in more esoteric circles, is the interdimensional anchor. This theory suggests The object is not a craft, but a piece of stable exotic matter that holds a gateway or wormhole open to another universe. The signals detected by Dr. Thorne were not communications, but the sound of another reality, bleeding into our own. A more grounded yet equally unsettling hypothesis is the lost precursor theory. It argues the object is a technological artifact from a long-lost, highly advanced terrestrial civilization that predates humanity. We haven't discovered something alien. We've stumbled upon our planet's own forgotten history, a history whose technology could rewrite everything we know about our past and future. Each theory attempts to explain the extreme secrecy. If it's a sentinel, is it hostile? If it's a gateway, what might come through? If it's our own lost technology, who has the right to control it? The silence from global powers only fuels the fire. The Kakorum anomaly has become a modern myth, a blank space on the map where our greatest fears and wildest hopes converge, all stemming from the discovery that triggered classification. We are left here, in the dark, with the echoes of a story that has been systematically erased. We have the fragment, a piece of physics-defying matter. We have the ghost, Dr. Aerys Thorne, a man who wagered his life for the truth and lost. And we have the fortress of ice, the Kakorum exclusion zone, a place where our world's most powerful entities stand guard over an unknown. All these threads lead back to a single, monumental, and unanswered question. Why? Why this level of absolute secrecy? The justification of national security feels hollow, insufficient for a secret held this tightly across decades and rival governments. This suggests a reason that transcends geopolitics. One possibility is technological. The object could represent a power source, a propulsion system, or a computational ability so advanced that whichever nation masters it would hold absolute, unchallengeable power over all others. The secrecy, then, is the cold calculus of a new and ultimate arms race, one being fought in the shadows. Another, more philosophical reason is the preservation of society itself. This is the theory of ontological shock. We as a species are defined by our stories, our religions, our scientific principles. What happens when a single discovery proves them all to be incomplete, or worse, fundamentally wrong? The revelation that we are not alone, or that our reality is not the only one, or that our history is a lie, could trigger a societal collapse from which we might never recover. The classification, in this scenario, is a desperate, paternalistic act of quarantine, protecting the fragile human psyche from a truth it is not ready to bear. But there is a third, far darker possibility. What if the secrecy is not to protect us from the discovery, but to protect the discovery from us? What if the object is not a tool to be used, but a threat to be contained? Perhaps the signal Dr. Thorne detected was not a handshake, but a beacon. Perhaps the object is learning, adapting, and the fortress around it is not to keep us out, but to keep it in. In this terrifying scenario, the classification is an act of planetary defense. We are not hiding a secret. We are managing a potential extinction-level event. This is the true weight of the discovery that triggered classification. It has created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes our deepest anxieties. The silence of the powerful is not empty. It is filled with implication. It suggests that the answer to our question is something more profound, more transformative, or more horrifying than anything we can imagine. The story of the Kakorum anomaly is not about what we know, but about the terrifying power of what we are not allowed to know. The final page of the file is not just redacted, it has been torn out, and we are left to wonder what was written on it forever.